the thing is, kind of like with creatine, and people are like, it's just water. And you're like, no, dude, if 80% of your muscle is just water, it's not just water, right? Like
it's important.
Yeah, it's important.
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
All right. So today, me and Brad are going to talk about how much muscle you can build.
Like the total amount, not just like in a 6-week period, but like the max amount.
Yeah. So we always hear about lean training for lean mass or how much, like the idea of working out and gaining 5, 6, 7 pounds in a research study, let's say.
Yeah.
But is that any of that indicative of how much muscle someone can actually build, like overall, like full stop?
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone stops to consider how much a couple of pounds of muscle actually is. And then if you
16-ounce steak is a pound of muscle, right?
It's a lot. But but again, muscle doesn't, like a hydrated muscle versus a dehydrated muscle.
Yep.
Like a pumped up muscle is different than a not pumped up muscle.
The protein in your muscle is really just scaffolding to hold a giant water balloon together. I mean, your muscles are, majority of your muscle is water, right? And the protein just acts as this like sort of scaffolding holding it together. So yeah, you dehydrate that muscle and it's beef jerky, right? You hydrate it out, it's a steak sort of thing.
Right. So when we talk about building lean mass or building muscle, are you talking measuring it in the fully hydrated state versus not the fully hydrated state? For example, I did a DEXA scan the other day and I did a back-to-back scan 5 minutes apart and I just drank a couple liters of water and it all registers as lean mass on the DEXA scan, but that's not in the muscle cell. That's just water in my stomach.
Yeah.
So, but that's just an example of how
if you waited 20, 25 minutes, that'd be plasma volume. And then if you waited longer, a little bit of that might be in muscle, but it would never, without some sort of osmosis thing to bring it into the muscle, it wouldn't really do anything. Yeah.
And short-term steroid use, anabolic, like supraphysiological testosterone, causes more hydration at the muscle level. Like there's a lot of muscle bloat. So it's not necessarily contractile protein units being added to the scaffolding of the muscle, to use your words. It's some amount of it is just hydration status, but that's actually a really big deal given that.
Well, that's the thing is, kind of like with creatine, and people are like, it's just water. And you're like, no, dude, if 80% of your muscle is just water, it's not just water, right? Like
it's important.
It's important. So the water weight, same thing when you do a 24-hour fast and you lose like 6 pounds overnight and like 4 pounds that is water, like it's just water. Like, you were carrying around 4 extra pounds of water. In the case of fasting, that wasn't muscular water, like muscle water. It was sort of that interstitial fluid excess, right? So just dismissing water weight or water volume is a mistake that we make a lot.
Right. So I guess we're kind of talking about what actually is building muscle. What does that even mean? Yeah. And so the analogy I always use is like, picture a balloon, just the rubber of the balloon. You can have different size balloons, right? You can have a balloon that starts off like, this big or like this big. And there's more total rubber. So when you blow it up, one of them just ends up totally bigger than the other.
Yeah.
But so when we talk about long-term muscle building, I think what we're talking about is adding rubber to the balloon.
You're adding more scaffolding that will allow you to hold more water.
Then it can inflate bigger.
Yeah.
So you're going from a smaller balloon to a bigger balloon. But in both cases, the balloon needs to be inflated. So a good example was a buddy of ours tore his bicep off at the elbow, like completely full tendon rupture. Gross. And at the time, we were at the end of college. He was very well muscled, like late 20s. It's for his size, he was about 5'10", maybe 175, but like he had really, really well developed arms. And put it this way, a much larger arm than if he'd never worked out back in high school. Like this was a big, anybody walking by like, fuck, that guy's got big arms, right?
Yeah.
So he tears the tendon down here, like completely at the elbow, completely off, which is actually super rare. Bicep tears almost always up in the shoulder. Anyways, it's in a cast.
How do you do it? Preacher curls?
No, moving furniture is so not glamorous. Anyways, so, and his arm shrunk down to the size of a 10-year-old boy. Like it was tiny. Yeah. Now, within 3 months of recovery, his arm was back to full size. And I mean a big muscular arm.
Yeah.
So the point is, all of that. So this is the muscle memory concept, but this is the good illustration of an inflated versus deflated muscle. But he'd spent all those years training. The scaffolding, the rubber of the balloon, as it were, was bigger and maintained the scaffolding even through a catastrophic injury, such that when he recovered, it came right back to full size in like 3 months. It's not like he had to do 15 years of training to get it all the way back. Like the structural changes in the protein of the muscle maintained, but the hydration status, it was quote unquote empty because it was in a cast and it couldn't move. So that's I'm hoping this analogy is landing with the two things we're talking about. We're talking about filling the muscle up like it's hydrated with water, and the rubber, the scaffolding, the rubber of the balloon, as it were, but the protein itself of the muscle, there's more of it, so it can hydrate up larger.
So, and this leads into, because I'm going to say that for the average 5'9", 5'10" guy, whatever the average is now, a good addition of muscle is like 14 pounds. And people are going to be like, dude, I've got a friend who gained 40. And what we're going to argue is that there are specific times where you can definitely add 40 pounds of muscle, especially if you're adding back 30, right? Because it's hydration, it's that loss that you have when you've been in a cast, right? You've been sick, et cetera. You've stopped training. And so the variability is quite large, but the max amount you can add over your already sort of average muscle mass for your frame is typically, I would say, like 14, if you're really lucky, 20 pounds. Really lucky, right? And reminding people that even 7 pounds would be 7 16-ounce steaks add to your body. It would be 7 pounds of actual muscle would be noticeable. Your friends would notice, right? So, and 40 pounds would be extreme. Now, you also, something we should touch on is the lean mass gains you get when you increase in height, especially with peak height velocity when you're like 14, 15. And then the lean mass you gain in peak mass velocity, which happens right after peak height velocity. So sort of at the end of puberty. So if you have someone who is either late to puberty or it just happens to be measuring at that time, let's say they're 18, 19. Well, if they're just hormonally gaining 15, 20 pounds and weight training and gaining maybe another 8 or 9, that's where you get those 30-pound claims from.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And they're legit. Those are not lying claims. They're just people who measured at the exact right time, right? You're not getting a lot of 60-year-olds gaining 30 pounds of muscle without help, right? And then go ahead. The only other thing I wanted to add was people didn't. I think we've talked about this in one of our things we think but can't prove topics. But I really feel that cardio training or long distance endurance training builds up scaffolding without the extra hydration, and they have a large mass potential, right? Because they're kept lean by their sport, but they built up muscle mass. Even if it's a different fiber type, the scaffolding is still there, and they have a large ability to gain muscle, which is why you see really weird things like ex-runners developing very large thighs when they start weight training, and ex-swimmers really large upper bodies when they quit swimming and move to a bodybuilding routine, right?
They for sure would have had some angiogenesis, like
100%,
more muscle, more capillaries, more blood flow to the muscle. That would have been
more nutrient delivery, more hormonal delivery.
So they'd be almost primed for a big gain in muscle mass if they switched from all of the extreme endurance to heavyweight training. And to your point, they've developed one of the type 1 fibers more than the type 2. So I mean, to that point, just to stray a bit into training, I think any muscle activation is going to matter. Now, obviously, to build maximum size, you have to be above a certain threshold. You can't just lift a pencil all day. You have to lift enough weight to stress the muscle. But that type of training, like to Brad's point, like consistent endurance training, is going to cause various structural changes, blood flow changes, capillary densities, a bunch of things that could definitely aid in gaining muscle. I think
may not cause strength gains, but it may cause strength potential gains because of the angiogenesis, right? So we conflate strength and size a lot because it's so training specific. But to your point, I think it builds up a sort of reserve capacity that when you exploit it, you see some pretty good growth.
Yeah, that's a good point about strength and size too. We're talking here about how much muscle can you gain, not how strong can you get. Like elite level power lifters and Olympic lifters, there's a reason why they have a weight class. They just keep going up in strength in the same weight class. It's not like everybody just keeps getting heavier. Their body doesn't keep getting heavier. Their strength keeps going up, but their body doesn't just keep getting bigger. So at some point, there's a limit there. Also, this is a good illustration. I don't know if you can see him, Dorian Yates, Mike Menser, Arnold's over on one shoulder. I think Franco's around here somewhere, Serge Nubret. Anyways, these are all ex-Mr. Olympia level bodybuilders, and all of them were using supraphysiological doses of anabolic steroids in all of these pictures, right?
I love when they go like, it wasn't that much back in the day. I'm like, it was still, look at you. It was still that much.
Yeah. It's a ton. It was always a ton.
Didn't measure it.
I think, and I've said this multiple times, guys, I think in general, who are even remotely aware of weightlifting and into fitness a little bit here, and especially into bodybuilding, or at least body composite training for muscle. Yeah. I think almost every guy's perception or concept of how big they can get, or how big what is possible, is skewed by these guys.
The problem with, and we'll get into this too, is that the leanness of those guys dictates how big they look to the average person, right? Whereas early 1980s, 1990s wrestling, like the Hulk Hogans, et cetera, who weren't as shredded as maybe the wrestlers are now, didn't actually, with no point of reference, look as big as some of these guys.
With no point of reference. That's a really good point.
With no point of reference. Standing beside him, you were like, remember when Hulk fought Rocky in a movie, right?
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was
Rocky
ridiculous.
4. Yeah. 3 or 4.
But with no point of reference, knowing that these guys are 5'8", they really do look like they're more muscled than just a big guy who's smoother. Yeah. And so it's a bit of the image illusion there, is the fact that just by being lean, they look well muscled as well. Right. So if you have two friends and one gains, 10 pounds of muscle, but the other one gains 6, but also lost a lot of fat, the guy who gains 6 will look probably bigger to you.
Right. And that, again, that's got to be shirt off big too.
Shirt off. Yeah. In a t-shirt, the bigger guy looks bigger.
In a t-shirt, you can get away with being less definition, but you just fill the shirt out a bit more. But as soon as the shirt comes off, whoever's leaner always looks bigger. So we've always called that shirt on versus shirt off big.
Exactly.
But in general, if you see people like this, or nowadays influencers who are in really good shape, the leaner the person is, to Brad's point, the bigger they look, even though they might not be as heavy as you think. I know Brad sent me an influencer, just said, guess how heavy this guy is. And my immediate thought was 215 pounds. The guy's like 175. Yeah. It's not that big. Like in my best condition, I'm only 180, but people think I'm 200. That's how far off our many people's conceptions of how much muscle and how heavy someone is versus how heavy they actually are.
Well, part of the problem there is, this is a good segue into our whole height thing, is we go off pro athletes, right? And for guys, just based on the increase in structure from being taller. So as you get taller, your shoulders are a bit wider, your organs are a bit bigger, your bone structure is a bit bigger. John and I figure it's about 7 pounds per inch up until about 6'3", and then it gets a bit higher than 7 pounds, right? Per inch gained. So if your only frame of reference is pro athletes who are 6'1" to 6'4", you're going to guess with no point of reference that kind of look at a 200-pound look, not realizing that on a 5'9", 5'10" guy, that's probably 170 to 180 pounds.
Right.
So that's what skews it, is the weight is largely dictated, and the ability to build muscle and carry weight is dictated by the total size of the skeleton, which is largely dictated by height, right? So your taller guy, a 6'8" guy, is going to be probably very, very skinny looking at 220 pounds. And a 5'9" guy at 220 pounds is going to look jacked.
Like one of these guys.
Yeah, even though the muscle mass is probably exactly the same. So so then a large, tall person is really large. Like really large. Yeah.
And that's a good point about pro athletes. I've just made the point that bodybuilders probably skew our thoughts of how big we can get, or how big just how big muscles can possibly get if you're not using steroids. But then if our other reference point is pro athletes, neither reference point is a normal guy.
No.
Like a normal 5'10", 6 foot tall guy isn't going to look like a pro bodybuilder or a pro athlete.
No. So and if you think about the health of the muscles on pro athletes and what's called survivorship bias or survivor's bias, they made it largely through high school, college, into the pro ranks without a catastrophic injury to the point where they can still train and they can still perform, right? So a lot of athletics is just weeding out at young ages kids with just catastrophic muscle tears and breaks and chronic injuries because they didn't quite have the structure needed to carry the muscle mass and the explosiveness, et cetera, for that sport.
Yeah.
So you can't use pro athletes as any sort of benchmark unless you're dealing with pro athletes.
Yeah. Like I'm wearing a Philadelphia Eagles Jalen Hurts shirt right now. That guy's a freak. He's 6 foot, maybe 225-ish pounds. He can squat 600 something. Saquon Barkley, his running back, same. They're heavily muscled people.
Let's take Barkley as a great example.
Yeah, go ahead. Barkley's
been hit harder in a light practice than I've ever been hit in my life.
Yeah.
And he's okay. If I got hit, if someone even thought of hitting me as hard as that guy gets hit, I would be broken apart, right? So structurally, he can handle the workload and volume needed for that amount of muscle mass to be built.
Right.
For that about explosiveness. So that's the survivorship bias thing I was talking about. Like he can just train and not break. So you can get larger than the rest of us can.
Yeah. So in review here, bodybuilders are not a good reference point for you because they're on anabolics. Oh, also bodybuilders are all genetically gifted. At least the ones that end up in a picture. They're usually genetically gifted.
Yeah.
Pro athletes.
Do you remember Bill Burr, the comedian?
Yeah.
And Bill Burr's like, Arnold Schwarzenegger's famous for lifting weights. He's like, I lift weights. No one gives a shit, right? Because, but you know, Bill Burr's got the time and effort. He's putting the work in. He just doesn't have the genetics and ability to build something worth taking your shirt off on stage. No offense, Bill. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So bodybuilders are not your reference point. Pro athletes, to Brad's point, are such a self-selected tiny minority that can make it as far as they make it without injuries that sideline them. Yep. And that's even more impressive because they're building muscle at the same time while they're putting their body through like the gauntlet of whatever their sport is. Whereas bodybuilders themselves are just building muscle and they're not subjecting themselves to other forms of physical trauma.
No one's trying to hit them while they're squatting.
No, but like a football player is putting themselves through a fair bit of trauma on top of trying to build and keep that muscle.
Yeah.
So pro athletes are not your reference point. Pro bodybuilders are not your reference point. Probably influencers aren't really even your reference point.
Not because someone went to their buddy and was like, dude, you look great. You should be an influencer, right? They already started in that direction. They already had that genetic, that drive or that history of training. Right?
Yeah.
So I guess that leads us to the lackluster results found in research trials that are typically done in college-aged kids or the community around a major college.
Yeah.
That's probably your reference point, and it's not great, right? Like if in how much protein, you and I just reviewed all the studies and just were like, hey, what's the benchmark? And you're like, roughly about 5 pounds of lean mass gain. Right. And we were like, if we can find a study that does more than 5 pounds of lean mass in that sort of 8 to 16 week period, then we'll be impressed. And they all fall in that range. Right. It almost just becomes the study is really just trying to figure out who can gain that 5 pounds quicker. Can you do it in 8 weeks or can you do it in 16? But that's more likely anybody listening, your reference point is those people. Right. And it's probably worse for you if you have a history of weightlifting. Because these people are fresh and they're building the new scaffolding and they're hydrating it, whereas you've been doing that for years, right? So it does become limiting that way. So it's not the bodybuilders, not the influencers, it's not the pro athletes. It's probably your average people in an average trial gaining, 5-6 pounds of muscle in an 8 to 16 week period. Now, that's not to say those training programs are optimal. No offense to the grad students who designed them, right? Or that the people in these studies followed the instructions or took the supplement or ate the way they're supposed to, right? It's just, they're a great benchmark sort of for like what good enough will get you.
Yeah. And so I was looking at, so how do we come to an answer here on how much muscle someone should expect to build? I was looking at some of the normalized equations for expected lean body mass at a given height. And for my height at 6 feet tall, they came in as low as 130 pounds of lean mass and as high as 140 something ish.
Now that's probably not depending. Okay. So one thing readers need to know is, especially when you're talking DEXAs with your friends or measurements, sometimes they include the skeletal mass. Sometimes they don't. Right. So the average skeleton,
6 to 7 pounds, maybe.
Yeah. So that can skew those numbers pretty considerably. And then you get really, really technical. People start teasing out like a lean mass or the water weight from a, what do you call the one that sends it? Bioelectric impedance versus DEXA.
Yeah.
They're all kind of rough numbers, but I don't know. My thing has generally been the average male putting in good enough effort, 5 to 7 pounds. And then the average male putting in like good, like I love going to the gym. I love pushing, right? I've got that drive. When I'm in the gym, it feels good. I get a pump, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You might be pushing 14
in additional actual pounds of lean mass, and that's give or take its hydration status.
Yeah, and it's also from your starting point. So for instance, I'm slightly smaller than you, just in frame.
Yeah,
I would say. So my 14 doesn't catch me up to you unless you don't train. You know what I mean? Like, so it's 14 on top of you, not 14 on top of some version you want to be.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And I'm 2 inches taller than you, so we would guess if you and I were equally muscled, we would guess I would.
My 170s, you're 185.
I would roughly be 14-ish pounds heavier than you, assuming we both were at equal muscle, either with no training, our base level. Right? That's kind of like what we're getting at. Like my base level should be roughly 14 pounds bigger than yours lean mass. And then if we both trained up, we should be able to maintain that 14-pound difference, as it were.
But
and if
your 6'2" buddy, same leanness as us,
right,
would be 200 pounds.
Right.
At 6'4", you'd be almost leanness. 220. Yeah. Right. At the same leanness. Yeah.
Right. Which kind of holds. So but the best we can come up with is you can, to Brad's point, you can likely gain between 7 and 14 pounds of measurable muscle mass.
Yeah.
And
if you're an average dude,
average size, like Brad's 5'10" an average build, I'm 6 foot tall average. Like I think we're painfully average.
Yeah. Like so if you're 6'3" listening to this and your friends always refer to you as the big guy, it might be 21, 22 pounds. Right? Like it might be more, right? Or if you're the guy who hasn't lifted weights a day in your life, and then the first time you went to a college town, someone's like, you should be a bouncer. You just got a different frame, right? You should, like, let's just not pretend you don't. But along the same lines, if you're the really, really skinny guy who, I don't know, is your prototypical, you played in a grunge band kind of thing, then it might not be 14, it might be 10. They're just, right? So
I guess the narrative here is if you've been working out for a while and you're wondering how come you're not getting bigger, it's probably because you've already hit your limit. I don't know if that's a depressing thing to tell people, but I mean,
I don't know what the fix is. I'm going to say this too, because you and I have gone, okay, we're pretty close to our max size. So I'm just going to cut massively down on volume. I'm going all in on intensity on weight. And it's fun for a while. It was good that you're always sore and injured, but I didn't really see any massive gains. Yeah. So then you go all in on frequency, and you just can't really do that forever either. And you can't go all in on volume unless this is your job, right? And you can nail off 2.5 hours a day with nice breaks. So I don't know what the answer there is, with the exception of, and this is what most guys fall into, gain fat.
Right. And they just don't want to do a DEXA to prove whether or not that was fat or not. And
they always just say they're 20 pounds off, right? You're 240, but you'd be on stage at 220, right? That kind of thing.
No. If you do for real DEXA measurements and you're being honest with yourself, 14 pounds is a massive, massive gain for the average guy of 6 feet or shorter.
I've got one for you though. Not only am I going to say 14 pounds, but I'm also going to say that once you lay down the majority of that 14 pounds, sort of in that, that peak time where you're training and you actually are gaining muscle, you can visibly see you're gaining.
Yeah.
The phenotype or the style in which you put that down, that's what you've got, right? So I'm never going to come down and visit you and you're going to be like, you have no chest and massive legs. Like it's never happened.
Oh, it's right. Yes.
Where I place that muscle is generally where that muscle is going to be. And that's a result of the training I did probably at my big sort of muscle growth spurt wasn't until about 19 to 21, somewhere in that range, kind of first to third year university for us. Guys who played, hockey or football through high school and a bit of college, like if they built up those kind of legs, they're not going to just not have those legs anymore.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely, now that's an anecdote. We can't prove it
Can't
scientifically.
Prove it. Things I think but can't prove. Yeah.
But we've always said that it seems as though whatever you either were good at or focused on, that's kind of, you're always biased towards that muscle group.
Yeah.
I've heard that. Now, I suppose you could try to refocus your training to bring up whatever muscle group you think is lacking compared to your best muscle group, right? As a comparison.
Yes, you can bring it up. I just don't think you can trade it around, right?
I don't think you can all of a sudden become leg dominant if you were chest dominant.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Exactly.
I don't know. It's the other thing is, all of this is, you can't relive your life multiple times to try this different ways.
No.
And most people's peak growth is in their 20s anyways. So whatever you type, unless you had a perfectly balanced routine and your body genetically was kind of balanced, you're probably going to have something on some muscle groups that just dominate other muscle groups on your body.
You're just going to be good at a lift.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to do it more. Right?
Yeah.
Like the minute you're the guy in the gym who can bench a little bit more, squat a little bit more than your buddies, that's the exercise you do when they're around.
You kind of gravitate towards it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So,
and if you hear any of the pro bodybuilders talk about the genetics for the aesthetic of bodybuilding, right out of the gates, there's just a few who have the genetics to look proportioned top to bottom. Many pros, when you actually look at them, things are not in balance.
No.
There can be leg dominated, like quad dominated. There can be guys whose arms really overpower their upper body. Now, most guys would be like, I always want big arms. But it can get to the point where your upper body kind of looks, your chest and your back and your shoulders don't quite look proportioned to your arms. So it actually makes your body look a little small.
Okay, so that's a great thing. Okay, so two things right there is, for the bodybuilders, the key is when you meet them in person, because they know how to work a stage, how to work lighting, their poses to make themselves look proportioned.
Yeah.
So when you see them in person, you're like, oh, geez, so your legs are way bigger than the rest of your body.
Yeah.
But also, getting back to some of our work with Adonis way back in the day, is one of the problems with building a large amount of muscle mass above and beyond, so that 14 pounds John and I are talking about, is you can make yourself look shorter.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah.
Very, very large arms, very, very sort of round upper body will make you look shorter than you are, which is why very skinny guys can look taller than they are. Yeah. Right. So you can mess with the aesthetics that way. So there is a bit of a art to the science of building muscle if you're into the aesthetic thing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So let's try to wrap this up. I don't even think we're trying to answer how much muscle can you actually build. I think to Brad's point, maybe 6 foot tall is a rough cutoff, and anything 6 foot or lower, we're thinking something between 10 and 15 pounds is about the max you're going to build. But
that's with high effort. Most people are going to gain 5 or 7 with good enough effort.
Right. And that's true actual muscle mass if you bother to measure, like on a DEXA. We're not talking about some fat or just some bloat. We're talking about actual. And if that doesn't sound like a lot, that's actually a lot. Like that would look like a lot.
Stack the stakes up, right?
Yeah. And now we're talking about average genetics and no anabolic, super physiological doses of testosterone or anabolics.
Yeah.
That's obviously that. The numbers change completely if you're on anabolics.
Yeah. So just for the point of this podcast, just always, whenever we say something in your head, think average dude.
Average dude. And then as far as people going up 6'1", 2, 3, like into that rare territory of super tall people, that number probably skews a bit larger. And you already know. But again, that's assuming sort of an average build and not like very, very slender at that height, but like just a scaled up normal sized person or thicker. Right. So, but again, but to Brad's point, takes maximum effort to get to this number anyways.
Yeah.
And in the end, I don't even think the number, does the number matter?
No, I'm going to say it doesn't.
Okay, how about
you
this?
look and how you feel matters.
Right. But if you're constantly feeling like, I'm just not getting there, I'm not getting there, you might have already got there. And it might and it might be your perception of how big you should have or could have gotten or should be is skewed by pro athletes, pro bodybuilders. Like you probably just
you also probably get caught on numbers. Right?
Caught on numbers. Somebody said they gained 40 pounds. It's like, no, they didn't. They just didn't. Yeah. And you probably have seen a bodybuilder or a pro athlete and think, oh, well, they gained. It's like, no, but that's not you.
Or Hollywood actors talking about how much they weighed for a certain scene. And like, I'm pretty sure Fight Club Brad Pitt was in the 150s. And now that number has come around, like people are now saying 170s, right?
Whatever. He just looked good on camera and that's that.
Yeah.
But he was not.
Gregor Gallagher could tell people he's 190. People would believe him, right? Like what matters is how you look, how you feel.
That's actually the place to leave it. Is what matters is how you look, how you feel.
Yeah.
If you've honestly put years, as in 5+ years of heavy training, of consistent heavy training in, you probably built the muscle your body's capable of building.
Yeah.
And another 5 years of killing yourself might only gain you a couple of more pounds.
And I will throw out, if you look at the size of a 16-ounce steak.
Yeah.
Right. That just adding a pound of muscle. So let's say you're almost completely as jacked as you're going to get, but you decide, you know what, I'm going to really focus on this one muscle group. You're never going to radically change your body type, but you add half a pound in muscle mass to your arms, people notice.
Yeah, imagine taking 10, 16-ounce steaks and just sort of duct taping them to your body. It would be massive.
Yeah.
And that's just
painful and gross.
Yeah, but I just mean, that is a lot. It is a lot.
Yeah.
And again, it's all of it's skewed by body fat gain and all that stuff. But the bottom line is, don't use pro athletes as your reference point. Don't use pro bodybuilders as your reference point. And something in the order of 10 to 15 pounds is a lot, but 10 to 15 pounds of actual muscle mass that you can prove via a real measurement like a DEXA.
And not, just to harp on this, but not 10 to 15 pounds past where you are now, 10 to 15 pounds past where you would be if you didn't train or just live an active lifestyle.
At all.
Yeah.
At all. And so that number, actually, I'll put it in the show notes. I'll put the general calculations of base muscle mass in the show notes. And you can at least get a rough idea at your height of what, if I never worked out at all at my height, how much muscle do these equations suggest I might have? And that'll give you at least a general target area of where you might be. And if you're 15 pounds above that number, you probably are at your quote unquote max size.
I mean,
in the absence of anabolics.
One that we use, so in any of our programs, is you just start with 100 pounds at 5 foot. And then for every inch above 5 foot, you add 7 pounds. So 170 would be a good lean looking me, right? Yeah. Now that's not contest, quite lean, but so, and then you would be 14 pounds above that, right? It kind of keeps going that way. Yeah. And then that breaks down after about 6'3", 6'2", 6'3".
Yeah. 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 Well, I don't know if we just made this more confusing than when we started, but that's at least.
It's not as much as you think, but that doesn't matter because it can look awesome.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah. That's a good way to leave it. All right. So I think that's a good place to leave it then.
Yeah. Yeah. Clear as mud.
Right. Yep. Clear as mud. All right. We'll catch you later.
Man. Yep. Peace.